Calhoun Magnolia Estate, Charleston, a June afternoon. 400 guests. White roses banked along the aisle. A chapel built in 1892. At the altar, Cordelia turned. She saw Holden step in from the back, his daughter's small hand in his. Her voice carried to every pew. "Look, my ex. Couldn't keep a job, couldn't keep a wife, couldn't keep his pride. A loser to the bone." Holden stood still. Across the aisle, Iris Lattimore held her breath. At the altar, Preston Vance turned. His face changed. He stepped down. He stopped in front of Holden. And then he bowed. 6 months earlier, Shem Creek at dawn, the tide pulling at the pilings, gulls calling above the marsh. Holden Merrick cracked 2 eggs into a cast-iron pan. The kitchen smelled of coffee and butter. From down the hall, the soft thump of small feet on hardwood. Maple appeared in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, holding a stuffed otter under one arm. She climbed onto the stool at the counter. "Toast?" she asked. "Already in." She watched him scramble the eggs. He cut the toast into triangles the way she liked. The yolk broke onto the plate and she pressed her finger into it before he could stop her, then grinned. "Daddy, Maple, can I come to the shop today?" After school, the shop was Merrick Marine Repair, 4 slips down from where they ate breakfast. A green tin roof, a hand-painted sign, a workbench that had belonged to his father. The boat folks in Charleston knew where to find him. He fixed outboards and rebuilt teak transoms and twice a year hauled out a vintage Hatteras that belonged to a state senator. He wasn't rich. He wasn't trying to be. The phone rang at 9:40. Cordelia's name on the screen. He answered on the second ring. He always did, where Maple was concerned. "Holden." Her voice was the temperature of January glass. "I need Maple to be flower girl. The wedding is the 3rd Saturday in June." He waited. "Calhoun Magnolia Estate. I assume you've heard of it." "I've heard of it. Fittings start next week. The event coordinator will call you. Try not to be difficult." She had said try not to be difficult the way other women said good morning. He listened to her breathing on the other end and thought about Maple. About the way Maple had asked, 3 nights ago at bedtime, whether her mother was going to invite her to anything ever again. "She'll be there," he said. "Of course she'll be there. She's my daughter." He didn't answer. "And Holden, don't make a scene. Don't make it about you." The line cut. He stood at the counter for a while. He poured the rest of his coffee out and rinsed the mug. The drive to Calhoun Magnolia Estate took 35 minutes north of the harbor. He'd never been on the property. The gates were stone. The live oaks were old. The gravel drive curved past a chapel and an old ice house that had been converted into a bar. Iris Lattimore met him in the front office. She was in a navy blazer and flat shoes. She introduced herself, offered coffee, declined his offer to wait in the foyer. They went through the timeline: arrival window, bouquet handoff, aisle walk, position during the recessional. She asked good questions about Maple, whether the child got nervous in crowds, whether he had a song that calmed her. He answered each one. When he stood to leave, she looked at him for a half-second longer than she had looked at him before. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the man in front of her did not match a single sentence the bride had used to describe him. She walked him out. She returned to her desk. She wrote, in the margin of her notepad in pencil, "Check the file." Then she closed the folder and moved on. The bell over the shop door rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and Rowan Tate came through it carrying 2 coffees from the place across the bridge. Rowan was 50 pounds heavier than he had been in 2014, and his hair had gone silver at the temples, but the way he stood in a doorway hadn't changed. He set the coffees on the bench. Holden wiped grease off his hands. "You look like a man who hasn't slept," Holden said. "I look like a man with a security contract. Anyone good?" "Vance family." Holden took the coffee. He took it black, the way he had for 20 years. "Wedding," Rowan said. "3rd Saturday in June. Preston Vance." Holden took a long sip. "I heard." Rowan watched him. They had gone through Bud S together. They had served together in 3 places no one was supposed to talk about. Holden had been the lieutenant commander on a Tuesday in June of 2014 when a 5-man naval intelligence unit had gotten itself pinned in a compound on the wrong side of a wadi outside Aden, and Holden had taken 3 SEALs and walked into something the after-action report had called austere conditions, and the men who lived through it had called nothing at all because they had agreed never to. Holden had been decorated twice for Yemen. He had been decorated once before that for Mosul. and once before that for a riverbed in Mali. He had retired in 2018, the week Maple was born. He had told Rowan, that week, that he wanted his daughter to grow up knowing what her father did for a living because he was good at it, not because someone had handed him a flag. Cordelia had married him in 2015. She had married a man with a uniform and a quiet bank account, and a presumed inheritance, and she had not married a man who fixed outboards on Shem Creek. By 2022 she had filed. She had not contested custody. She had not asked for it. "You okay with this?" Rowan said. "It's her day. That's not what I asked." Holden looked out at the dock. A heron stood on a piling, staring at the water with the patience of a man who had a job. "I'll keep my distance." Rowan nodded. He drained his coffee. He put a hand on Holden's shoulder briefly and went out. The next afternoon, Iris Lattimore drove up to the shop in a charcoal sedan and parked at the head of the gravel. She found him on a sawhorse, sanding a cleat. Maple was beside him on a stool, painting a small brass fitting with a brush she could barely hold. Her tongue was between her teeth in concentration. There was a smear of green paint on her wrist. "I had 2 questions," Iris said, "about the rehearsal timing." "Ask them." She asked them. He answered. Maple looked up, recognized her from the previous week, and offered her a fitting to paint. Iris took the brush. She painted half of it green and handed it back. "Thank you," Maple said gravely. "You're welcome," Iris said gravely back. Holden watched the exchange. Iris did not look at him while it happened. When she straightened, she said only, "I'll see you Friday for the rehearsal," and walked back to her car. He stood at the edge of the dock and watched her drive out. He did not know yet what to call the thing he had felt. Neither did she. Friday came humid and bright. The rehearsal was set for 4. Cordelia arrived at 3:48 in a silver Range Rover and walked through the front doors of Calhoun Magnolia Estate as if she had bought the building. She had a list. The list was for the staff. Things had been done incorrectly. The chairs were the wrong shade of cream. The aisle runner had a crease. The string quartet had been booked through the wrong agency and would need to be reminded that this was, quote, not a Hilton wedding. Iris met her at the foyer. Iris took the list. Iris smiled. In the back row of the chapel, Marjorie Vance sat alone in a dove-gray suit, her purse closed in her lap, watching her future daughter-in-law speak to the housekeeping staff in a tone she had not, in 68 years, ever heard her own mother use on a maid in Charleston, South Carolina. Marjorie did not move. She did not interrupt. She had not, in 3 decades of married life and 4 decades of widowhood, made a habit of interrupting. She made a habit of seeing. She was seeing. Holden came in at 4 with Maple. He wore a clean white shirt and gray pants. Maple was in a yellow sundress, holding a small basket she had been told to practice with. Cordelia turned in the middle of the aisle and saw them. "Oh," she said, loud enough for the staff. "Everyone. This is my ex. The reason I know what settling means." A few of the bridesmaids laughed. The laughter was thin and uncertain. One of them looked at the floor. Holden did not respond. He bent down and adjusted the strap of Maple's sundress where it had slipped. Iris stepped forward. Her voice was professional and contained and without warmth. "Mr. Merrick is here as the father of the flower girl," she said. "We are behind schedule. Let's reset. Maple, sweetheart, do you want to come stand with me by the doors?" Maple looked at her father. Her father nodded. Maple went. Cordelia's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She had been ready to keep going. She had been counting on a small audience. She found instead that the room had returned to its work, that the staff had taken cues from Iris's tone, that her bridesmaids were suddenly very interested in the order of the processional. She did the rehearsal. She did it briskly. She corrected Maple twice, neither time for anything Maple had done wrong. At the end, Holden waited at the back of the chapel for his daughter. Iris walked her down the aisle, holding her hand. She handed Maple over with a small smile. He nodded at her. She nodded back. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Marjorie Vance, still in the back row, saw the exchange. She also saw the way Cordelia, halfway up the aisle, turned and watched it happen and did not for a moment know what to do with what she had seen. Marjorie stood. She left through the side door. She walked the long path to the office of the estate's director and asked, politely, whether they kept the contact information of suppliers and contractors on file. The receptionist said they did. Marjorie thanked her and walked back to her car. Cordelia called at 8 that night. Holden picked up because she might be calling about Maple. "I want you to drop her off and leave," she said. "I don't want you in the chapel. Maple asked me to stay. Maple is 7. She's 8. Cordelia made a small sound. The sound of a woman who had been corrected on the age of her own child by the man she had divorced. "I don't care. You can sit in the back. You can sit in the parking lot. I don't want you near the altar." "Maple asked me to stay," Holden said again. "I'll be in the chapel." He hung up first. Maple was on the couch in her pajamas. The book was Charlotte's Web. They were on the chapter where Wilbur is small and lonely. She wasn't lonely, she said. She just didn't want to walk down the aisle alone. "You won't be alone," he said. "I'll be standing where you can see me. If you forget what to do, you look at me. I'll be there. What if I cry? Then you cry. You won't be the first flower girl who did. What if Mommy is mad?" He thought about this for a moment. "I won't let her be mad at you." She pressed her face into his shoulder. He read the rest of the chapter and then carried her to bed. He sat on the porch afterwards, with the screen door open, and listened to the cicadas. At Calhoun Magnolia Estate, 20 miles north, Iris Lattimore was still in the office at 9:40. The day's final walkthrough had run long. She closed her laptop and locked her file drawer, and walked out toward the lot, and at the lot she found that her car had a flat tire. Holden's truck had been at the property earlier that day to drop off a piece of trim for the carriage house. He had stopped to help with a generator the venue's groundskeeper could not get to start. He was still on the property, in the gravel lot, packing his toolbox. He saw Iris. He saw the tire. "Spare in the trunk?" he asked. "Yes." He had it changed in 12 minutes. She held the flashlight. They did not speak much. When he finished, she said, "My father ran this place. He died 4 years ago. I came back to take it over. There are days I do not know if I'm running it or if it's running me." He wiped his hands on a rag. "You know what you're doing," he said. "How can you tell? You correct your staff in private. You don't correct them in front of guests. The bride does the opposite." She looked at him for a long second. "Thank you for the tire. Thank you for the rehearsal." She did not ask what he meant. She knew. Cordelia, who had circled the property in her Range Rover looking for a missing earring her bridesmaids had not been able to find, slowed at the edge of the lot and saw them through the windshield. Her ex-husband, her event coordinator, standing 6 feet apart in the floodlight, not touching, not laughing, not doing anything at all. She drove on. She did not stop. Something cold had settled in her chest, and she did not look at it directly. The wedding was set for 4 in the afternoon on the 3rd Saturday of June. Preston Vance, dressed in the groom's suite on the 2nd floor of the main house. He was 43. He was an investment banker in Charlotte, although he kept a house on Sullivan's Island, and was looking, post-wedding, to move down full-time. He had served 4 years as a naval intelligence officer between college and the firm. He had earned his promotions the slow way. He had a younger brother who had died in a car wreck in 2007, and a mother who had buried both her husband and her younger son, and a quiet kindness that women had often mistaken for weakness, and that Cordelia had mistaken for opportunity. He did not, on his wedding day, understand who his bride was. He understood that she was beautiful. He understood that she could be cutting. He had told himself that she had been through a hard divorce, and that the cutting was a defense. He had not yet examined that thought too closely. He buttoned his shirt. He drank a glass of water. He went down to greet the guests. Rowan Tate was at the front entry with 2 of his men. He nodded at Preston. Preston had met him twice. He nodded back. Holden arrived at 3:20 with Maple in the back seat. He parked at the far end of the lot. He took her hand. They walked the gravel path to the side entry of the chapel, where the bridal party had been told to gather. Rowan saw him from across the lawn. Their eyes met across 200 feet of crushed shell and live oak shade. Neither man moved. Neither nodded. The acknowledgement was older than that. Iris saw it too, from the chapel steps. She filed the moment away. Cordelia found Holden in the side garden and told him, in a low voice, that he was to wait in the back row of the chapel and not move until the recessional. He said all right. He walked Maple to the bridesmaid handler, who took her with a smile and a juice box. He kissed the top of Maple's head and stepped back. Iris passed him on the chapel steps. She did not look at him directly, She let her hand brush his forearm for a single second. "He's lucky to have you," she said. She kept walking. He went into the back of the chapel and sat in the last row on the bride's side. He did not look at the altar. 20 minutes earlier, in Iris's office, Marjorie Vance had come in and closed the door behind her. "Iris," she said, "you called him Mr. Merrick at the rehearsal." "Holden Merrick?" "Yes, ma'am. Do you have a vendor profile on him for the venue? Tax forms? Any kind of identification?" "He's not a vendor. He's the father of the flower girl." "But you had his information." "I had the date of birth. The bride provided it for the family records." Marjorie was quiet for a beat. "Year of birth?" Iris told her. "And do you know what he did before he opened his shop?" "No, ma." "I do," Marjorie said. "Thank you, Iris." She walked out. She did not say where she was going. Iris closed the file and did not for the moment ask. At 4 o'clock, the string quartet began. The chapel was full. 400 chairs. White roses on the ends of the pews. Sun coming through the 1892 stained glass in long-colored bars across the floor. Maple walked first. Her basket of petals was nearly too large for her hands. She kept her eyes on her father, who was sitting in the last row on the bride's side and smiling at her, and she walked the way they had practiced, one foot in front of the other, and she did not cry, and she did not drop the basket. Holden's eyes did not leave her until she reached the altar, and the bridesmaid handler took her to her place beside the chairs reserved for the wedding party. Then the music shifted. The doors opened. Cordelia came down the aisle on the arm of her uncle. She kept her eyes on Preston the whole way. She had practiced this look in the mirror. It was the look of a woman who had earned what she was about to receive. She reached the altar. Preston took her hand. The minister began. The vows had been written by a friend of Cordelia's, a woman in Atlanta who wrote magazine copy. They were elaborate. They were full of words like Odyssey and Covenant. Preston spoke his first. He spoke them simply, the way he had spoken his ensign's oath 20 years before. Then Cordelia. She got halfway through her second sentence and stopped. She turned. She had seen Holden in the back of the chapel. The turn was deliberate. It was the turn she had been thinking about for 6 months, since the engagement had been announced, since she had decided that the wedding would not be complete without him there to see it. Her voice was clear. Her voice carried. "Look, my ex. Couldn't keep a job. Couldn't keep a wife. Couldn't keep his pride. A loser to the bone." The chapel did not breathe. Preston turned. He looked at Holden for the first time. Until that moment, Preston had registered the man in the back row only as Cordelia's ex, as the father of the small flower girl, as a problem his mother had said little about and that he had decided to handle with grace. He looked. His face changed, slowly. The way a man's face changes when he is trying to place a sound from 20 years ago. He could not place it. Not yet. Before he could speak, there was movement in the front row. Marjorie Vance stood. She was 68 years old. She wore a champagne-colored suit. Her purse was still in her seat. Her hands were at her sides. Her voice, when it came, was low and even and absolutely without hurry. "Cordelia, stand down. You don't know who you're talking to." The bride blinked. The minister looked at the mother of the groom in a way ministers do not look at mothers of grooms in front of 400 people. Marjorie did not look at the minister. She looked at her son, Preston. Look at his face. Look at it properly. Yemen, 2014. Preston turned again. He looked. This time he did not have to try. The memory came in like a wave that had been held a long way offshore. A compound, a radio, a voice in his ear, a man, taller than him by an inch, blood on his sleeve, dragging him out a door he had thought he was going to die behind. He had been 23. He had never known the name. Preston let go of Cordelia's hand. He did not say anything to her. He turned from the altar and stepped down the 3 short steps and walked, in his wedding suit, down the aisle of the chapel, built in 1892, past 400 guests who were not breathing, past his own mother, past the string quartet, past the bridesmaids in their dove-gray dresses. Cordelia, behind him at the altar, said, "Preston, Preston, where are you going?" He did not turn. He reached the back row. He stopped in front of Holden Marek, who had not stood up. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Preston bowed. It was not a nod. It was not a head dip. It was the bow of a junior officer who has, after 10 years, found the commander who pulled him out of a kill zone, and who has never, in those 10 years, had a face or a name to put to the act. It was deep. It held for 3 full seconds. The chapel was so quiet, You could hear the live oaks moving outside. Preston straightened. "Sir," he said. His voice was not loud. It carried because the room had become a vacuum. "I owe you my life. Yemen, 2014. You pulled my unit out of that compound. I never knew your name. I have been looking for 10 years. Marjorie, in the front row, gave the smallest nod. She had been certain. She had needed to be certain. She had been certain since the rehearsal. Cordelia's hand went to her mouth. She came down from the altar fast, the train of her dress catching on the second step. She did not notice. "Preston," she said. "You're confused. He's just a—" Preston turned. He looked at her. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You called this man a loser. You called the man who saved my life, and the lives of my men, a loser." The bride had no answer. Her mouth was open. Her eyes had gone glassy and uncertain. The dress, which had cost her father's brother $17,000, was bunched in her hand. Holden, in the back row, finally rose. He was nearly the same height as Preston. He did not extend his hand. He did not need to. "It's not necessary, Lieutenant. I did my job." "It is necessary, sir. It was a long time ago. It was the most important day of my life until today, sir. And it isn't anymore." He said the last sentence looking at Cordelia. Marjorie Vance rose from the front row. Her voice was steady. It traveled. "The wedding is over." The minister closed his book. Cordelia made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a word. Her maid of honor moved toward her slowly and stopped, because she did not know what to do with the woman she had grown up with. In the side aisle, Iris Lattimore stood with one hand resting lightly on the back of a pew. She had not moved in 3 minutes. She was understanding in real time things she had been quietly piecing together for a week. She was understanding the quiet of the man at the workbench, the way the heron had stood on the piling and not flown, the way Maple had been told, very plainly, that her father would be there. She did not look at Holden. She did not need to. She understood him fully, for the first time. The guests rose, slowly, the way guests rise after the end of something they had not been told they were going to witness. Marjorie went to her son and put her hand on his arm and said something into his ear. Then she went to Cordelia. She did not raise her voice. She walked Cordelia to a small parlor off the chapel and closed the door behind them. What was said in that room nobody outside of it ever heard. What Cordelia carried out of it, she carried out of it alone, 20 minutes later, without her veil and with her chin up and her hands shaking. Preston found Holden in the side garden by the magnolia tree. Maple had been led there, by Iris, with a juice box and a small chocolate that Iris kept in her desk for the occasional crying child. Preston stopped at a respectful distance. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said. "You and your daughter. Anywhere you'll go." Holden looked at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head once. "Take care of yourself, Lieutenant. That's all I want. Sir, you owe me nothing. You never did." Preston's jaw worked. He nodded. Finally, he extended his hand. Holden took it. It was a long handshake. It said most of what was going to be said. Preston went back to the chapel. Holden went to the magnolia. Iris was on the bench under it. Maple was beside her, with her shoes off, swinging her feet. "Daddy," Maple said. Mommy was sad. "I know, sweetheart. Are we going home?" "We're going home." Iris stood. She walked the two of them down the gravel path toward the gate. At the gate, Holden paused. "I didn't know," Iris said. "Most people don't. That's how I wanted it." She looked at him. She looked at Maple, who had wandered ahead to look at a chameleon on the stone wall. "I'm glad I do now," she said. He nodded. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. He took Maple's hand and walked her to the truck and buckled her into her booster seat and drove her home. That night, in a house on Sullivan's Island that she had agreed, 2 months earlier, to move into once the wedding was done, Cordelia, who had not legally become a Vance, sat on the marble floor of the master bathroom in her stripped-down wedding dress and called her divorce attorney from 2022. "I want to file for custody," she said. "Full custody. He hid this from me. He hid this from our daughter. That's deception. That's grounds." The attorney, who had handled her uncontested divorce 4 years before and had not heard from her since, listened in silence for a moment. "Cordelia," he said carefully, "I don't think, and I'm going to the press." He lied. He lied for years. "Cordelia, I want it on every network in this city by Monday." She hung up. She stayed on the marble floor a long time. The house was very quiet. The dress, which had been steamed that morning, was wrinkled now in a way that would never come out. On Sunday afternoon, the first story went up on a local site that ran on engagement and outrage. By Sunday night, it had been picked up by 2 regional outlets. By Monday morning, a van with a satellite dish was parked on the gravel shoulder outside Merrick Marine Repair. Holden walked out of the shop at 7:30 in the morning, locked the door behind him, picked Maple up at her grandmother's, dropped her at school through the side entry that the principal, an old friend of Holden's late mother, had quietly opened for them, and went back to the shop. He did not speak to any reporter. He did not answer any door knock. He did not look at his phone. He worked. He sanded a transom. He spliced a new dock line. He let the message light blink. At 10 in the morning, in a sunlit room on Trad Street with a fireplace and a portrait of a great-grandfather on the wall, Marjorie Vance sat down in front of a small camera and 3 reporters she had personally invited. She spoke for 9 minutes. She spoke about Yemen. She spoke about her son. She spoke about the citation she had obtained, through channels available to her, that had named Holden Marek as the officer in command on the night her son had been pulled out of a compound she would not, even now, describe in detail. She spoke about a man who had retired the week his daughter was born to give that daughter a father at the table for breakfast. She spoke about a woman who had married him for what she had imagined his life would become, and who had, when it had not become that, mocked him at her own wedding in front of 400 people. She spoke about character. Preston stood beside her. When the cameras turned to him, he said only this: "My family stands with Mr. Marek. The man my mother described is the man I owe my life to. Anything you have read this weekend that suggests otherwise is wrong." He did not take questions. The story turned over inside of 48 hours. By Wednesday, Cordelia's attorney had told her, in a phone call she did not recover from, that there was no basis on which any court in South Carolina would entertain a custody petition. There was no concealment of a felony. There was no abuse. There was no neglect. There was a man who had quietly, in accordance with policy and personal preference, declined to discuss a classified service record with an ex-wife who had not asked. He told her to drop it. She dropped it. Iris Lattimore drove down to Shem Creek on Wednesday evening. She had not been invited. She parked on the gravel and walked to the dock, and saw Holden sitting on the pier with his feet over the water and a coffee mug beside him. She sat down on the boards beside him. She did not say anything for a long time. He didn't either. The tide moved. A heron lifted from a piling and crossed the marsh toward Mount Pleasant. Eventually he said, "You want coffee?" She said, "Yes." He went to make it. 3 weeks passed. The cameras were gone. The story had moved on to other stories. Merrick Marine Repair was running through its usual summer rush. Outboard tune-ups before the 4th, hull patches before the regatta, a teak refit that had been promised in March. On a Friday late in the afternoon, Maple came down the gravel path from the school van with a piece of paper in her hand. The school bus dropped her at the corner now. She walked the last 100 yards by herself, which she had told her father, with great seriousness, she was now old enough to do. She found her father on the dock, sanding. "Daddy," she said, "I drew a thing." He set the block down. He sat with her on the boards and looked at the drawing. It was a boat with a yellow sun behind it. The boat had 3 figures on it. One was tall, one was smaller, one was a cat. "That's Whisker," she said, pointing at the cat. "That's me. That's you. It's the best boat I've ever seen." She leaned against him. A car came up the gravel. Iris parked it. She got out with 2 paper cups of coffee from the place across the bridge. She walked down the dock. She handed Holden one of the cups. "Hi, Maple," she said. "Hi," Maple said. "Do you want to see my drawing?" Iris sat down on the dock beside her. She looked at the drawing with the seriousness it deserved. Whisker appeared from under the workbench and rubbed against Maple's leg and walked, with the long-suffering dignity of a shop cat, to a sun patch and lay down in it. They sat on the dock a long time. They talked about small things. Iris had a sister in Savannah who was pregnant. Holden had been thinking about putting a second slip in. The heron, the same heron, was on the same piling. Maple wandered off to talk to Whisker. "I'll come back next week," Iris said. "Same time, if you want." "I want." She stood. She brushed the dock dust off her jeans. She bent and picked up the empty coffee cups. She walked back to her car. Holden watched her go, the way men watch women who are walking away who are coming back. The car turned out of the gravel and onto the road. Maple came back over and leaned against her father's side. "Daddy," she said. "Who was that?" Holden looked at the marsh. The light was turning the water the color of old brass. The heron stood on the piling. The tide had begun to come in. "A friend. Will she come back?" "I think so." "Good." She put her hand into his hand. He closed his fingers around hers. Across the creek, a shrimp boat was coming in from the day. The gulls followed it. The marsh grass moved in a slow breath of late June wind. Neither of them had been looking, but both of them somehow had found